Here is a motion picture film. Let's tidy up this tangle of film by putting it on a reel.
Welcome to Film Swap.
Hello.
My name is David Seeley, and this chap here is the incomparable, always awesome, ecstatic gaucho himself, Mr. Jonathan Pritchard Barrett. Jonathan, how are you?
Hi there, David. I'm very well, thank you. Slightly tired after a weekend volunteering at the Cubs, but I'm well, and I'm ready to talk about today's films.
Awesome. Well, I'll tell you what, anime is a super exciting topic. We should say up front, neither Jonathan or I are really particular experts on anime, but there's a lot of really great films out there that we'd love to talk about. One of the films we were going to talk about tonight, we actually were planning on talking about it on our Strange Animations episode that we did a few weeks back. But because of some issues with Jonathan actually accessing the film, we ended up changing the roster there a little bit on that particular episode. Yep. And then we just decided we would postpone it and do an actual full anime-related episode where both films we're talking about tonight are Japanese animation films, feature length. So that's the story about where we're at. And today we're going to talk about two really great films. Jonathan, did you want to introduce your film?
My film is Grave of the Fireflies, and not The Grave of the Fireflies, just Grave of the Fireflies, and it came out in 1988. It's a terrific film. I'm really looking forward to discussing it.
Absolutely. It is a great classic of Japanese animation, and just Japanese cinema in general. It's a really, really great film. Yeah. I'm looking forward to diving into that. And my film today that I've put forward is a film that I only recently discovered a couple of years ago when it was released by a company called Cinelicious Pix, did a new 4K restoration, and they put it out on home media. And I was intrigued and picked it up, and absolutely, it blew me away. It is just a gobsmackingly amazing piece of film. And so it's something that I wanted to put forward and recommend to people that they go and check it out because it is really amazing. And it is a film from 1973 called The Belladonna of Sadness. And that film is one of the two that we'll be talking about tonight. Jonathan, what is your kind of experience? Because as I said, neither one of us are really sort of Japanese anime experts. We're just talking more as sort of general film fans, and we're picking out some specific films that we think are really interesting. But what is your kind of experience with Japanese anime? Are you a big fan, or are you?
Well, I'm the films I have seen I've enjoyed, but I wouldn't say I was a big fan in the sense that I've got a lot of films to watch. I've seen a few. The ones I have seen I've enjoyed. I think I first heard about anime in the 90s. When I was sort of at university, people were talking about this film called Akira, which is one of the sort of the classics. And then I sort of forgot, and people were saying, "Oh yeah, this anime stuff is really good." I never really managed to see. I think I saw Akira, but that's about it. And then I suppose the first one that really became aware of was Spirited Away when that came out in 2001. I remember going to the cinema to watch that and thinking, wow, this is great, love it, really good. But actually, looking back, I realized that when I was sort of, much younger, we used to watch this program on the television called Battle of the Planets.
Yes. Yes, I watched that as well.
Did you?
We're showing our age now, I suspect, Jonathan, but Battle of the
Yeah.
Planets was one of the ones I watched as well.
Yeah.
Um,
And that was it was actually, I think it was an American TV comic program, but it was based on a Japanese anime from the early 70s,
Yeah, I think
I
they
believe.
basically took the Japanese show and then heavily, which it was a fairly standard practice with films and TV programs that came from Asia at the time. They used to sort of edit them and then maybe add in additional content and things to sort of Americanize them.
Oh,
And
okay.
that was one of the shows I watched when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And I mean, there was other Japanese animation that it was imported to North America before I was sort of old enough to be aware of it, like things like
Okay.
Astro Boy and Speed Racer, which were quite popular
Right.
sort of programs. Earlier, like sort of in the 60s and things.
Okay.
But really, Japanese animation and just Japanese programming in general, it's not like today where it's a lot more prevalent and you can get it a lot more easier and there's a lot more people are more aware of it and it's more popular. But when
Yeah.
I was a kid growing up, I remember discovering a show just almost by accident. Probably I just put it flipped around on the TV and found it one day and became totally obsessed with it. When I watched it in North America, it was called Star Blazers, but it was
Okay.
actually a Japanese program called Space Battleship Yamato, and it
Right.
was directed by someone called Leiji Matsumoto, who also is quite famous. Later on, he made a couple of shows. One called Captain Horlock, the space pirate, and then there was a really popular one called Galaxy Express, which was about basically a train going through space on a journey with a
Wow.
little boy and this woman who was accompanying him. And that is a brilliant series. I really love
Hmm.
that. And I just recently revisited it and watched it through because the Discotheque Media has released a Blu-ray collection of the show.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, but Space Battleship Yamato was really amazing because I would have been like maybe 9 or 10 when this was on the television, and
Yeah.
it wasn't something like none of my friends watched it, and nobody was really aware of it. It wasn't popular, but it was
Right.
kind of like a space opera. What was
Wow.
unique about it was the fact that the show was like in a serialized format, and it had an
Hmm.
ongoing story arc that went all the way through it over however many episodes it was.
Yeah.
And so there were sort of distinct story arcs that lasted sort of several weeks on the show. And it
Yeah.
was like nothing else that was on television for sort of, animated programs for children at the time because it was a
Right.
little bit more sophisticated science fiction and it
Yeah.
had this ongoing story and character arcs and there was characters got killed in it and there was
Wow.
all these weird aliens and it was very imaginative and I
Hmm.
absolutely loved this show and was totally obsessed by it and I
Yeah.
remember actually having to run home from school because it was on quite early. So
Terrific.
when I got out of school, I had to really, really run home really fast to get home in time to catch the beginning of the program for
Yeah.
when it started. So I remember this little period where every day I'd just rush off home so I could watch this show because this is back before the days when there was VCRs and things like that and time shifting and streaming and all that. So you basically when something was on, you had to watch it when it was on, or else that was it. It was gone, and you
Yeah.
missed it.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was kind of my first exposure to kind of Japanese animation,
Yeah.
and as I said, nowadays over the years, like things like Akira and Ghost in the Shell,
Yes,
and
that's
sort
another
of
one.
some of these sort of big and of course most famously the Studio Ghibli films
Yeah.
have really popularized Japanese animation, and it's much more prevalent and easy to come by today.
Yeah.
Although one of the films we're talking about tonight, as I mentioned, has been extremely difficult to to get.
Mm.
It's actually not on any streaming service or anything in the United Kingdom.
No.
It is literally only available on Blu-ray or 4K disc, and
Yeah.
that is the only way that you can see it in the United Kingdom. In America, I think it's a bit different. I think it's a little bit easier to come by.
Oh, really?
But anyway, we'll talk a little bit about that because I'd like
Yep.
to encourage people to go out and search it out and find it because it is a really amazing film. And I think,
Cool.
Jonathan, we'll just take a very, very brief break.
Yes.
And then we'll come back and we'll talk about Belladonna of Sadness, our first film tonight.
Sounds like a great
Okay?
idea.
Yes, indeed. So,
Look forward to
listeners, just hang in there. We will literally be back in just a few seconds, so don't go away.
Thanks for listening to the Film Swap podcast. You can follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, Audible, and Google Podcasts, or on any of your favorite podcatchers. If you like this podcast, please consider giving the show a rating or leaving a review. This helps other listeners find the show.
And we're back.
We're back.
And it's a great... we watched two great films, and I suppose we should start with you, David, your film, the Belladonna of Sadness.
Yes.
What would you like to say about it?
Absolutely. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, Belladonna of Sadness is a film that I only recently discovered myself. It is a film that is probably relatively obscure, but I think that is a crime against humanity because I think this is a film that should be much, much more widely known and seen by people. And I hope now that it is out and it's available in a really nicely, beautifully restored video version that more people will discover it as time goes on. I would love to see it. I've not seen it in a cinema, actually. I think this is a film that would just blow your mind up on a big screen with all the sound and everything. It will be quite overwhelming. Because the main thing is this film is very much, we originally intended to pair this with Fantastic Planet when we were talking about our strange animations a few weeks ago. Because this very much fits into that time period and that style. Has a lot of kind of psychedelic imagery. The film is made up. The animation style is quite unique in that a lot of it is kind of still pictures. In a lot of times with the camera just sort of panning across. But when I say that people might say, "Oh, well, that sounds a bit boring." But actually, as a matter of fact, it's not at all because these pictures are amazing. They're kind of like sort of different styles throughout the film, but predominantly they're kind of like these watercolor based and very expressive and very amazing. And then occasionally there'll be a little bit of movement, and it's all very much a lot of metaphor and expressive imagery and stuff to tell the story and propel it forward. And it's all backed up with this really amazing kind of sort of jazz rock kind of fusion sort of soundtrack, which is absolutely amazing and really adds to the atmosphere and the drive of the film.
Yeah, this psych jazz, I'd say.
Yeah, kind of like the kind of stuff that kind of Miles Davis and some that was quite popular within jazz at the minute, that kind of fusion era, where they brought in more sort of rock and R&B rhythms into jazz music and things, and so it has that real vibe of real intensity and rhythmic drive to it, and along with all these really extraordinary sometimes images and quite a powerful story as well. I think this film is just completely blew me away the first time I saw it, and the second time and the third time I've seen it, because I've watched it a few times, and I watched it just yesterday and getting ready in preparation for the show.
Right.
So the director's name was Eiichi Yamamoto, and the film was released in 1973. It is kind of I guess on the one hand you could call it sort of a rape revenge story. And then on the other hand, you could call it almost a Faustian kind of story, because it's a little bit about this woman who is severely wronged and then kind of gives herself over to a kind of devil type character, or sort of, I guess, like an evil spirit. And she sort of gives herself over to him in order to gain the power to gain revenge on the people who have wronged her and many others, as it turns out.
Yeah.
So that is kind of the story. It was actually part of what was called an Animerama trilogy. So there was a
Gosh.
company
What's that?
well, there was a company in the late 60s. I guess to give you a little bit of context, obviously in the late 60s and early 70s, the Japanese film industry was going through a bit of a rough patch because
Oh,
more and
really?
more people had turned to television.
Ah,
Television had just exploded as a popular medium, and
yeah,
no one was really going to the cinema anymore. And so,
yeah,
what a lot of Japanese film companies did to try and counter this is that they tried to bring content to films that people just couldn't get at home on television.
yeah.
And what that predominantly meant was kind of more exploitation fare. So you'd get a lot more
Okay.
sex and violence and salacious kind of content.
Right.
And this was a time when you saw the rise of things like what they called the Roman porno films, which were not pornos in the sense that we would think of it in the West, like hardcore pornography, but more
Right.
like sort of softcore pornography, a lot of nudity
Okay.
and sort of sexual themed storylines.
Suggestive, rather
Yeah,
than
more suggestive. I mean, lots
yeah,
of nudity, lots of bare breasts and bottoms, but not full on sort of hardcore sex films
yeah,
like we would think of when we say porn films.
yeah,
Uh, and uh, and then there was also just a lot of the general content. What's interesting about this period in Japanese film as well, in terms of the kind of what we would call exploitation films, is that the
yeah,
difference between the kind of exploitation films that you get in the West, like in America and Europe, that
yeah.
tended to be very low budget films made by maybe first time filmmakers or filmmakers who just didn't have the resources of big studios and things, and
Yes.
they would be distributed in sort of the grindhouse circuit or on
Yeah,
drive-ins and things. But
yeah.
in Japan, we would be talking quite differently, that these were major film studios
Wow.
and using highly skilled, experienced film technicians and
Right.
writers and directors and actors. So you get a lot of films in this period from Japan that on the one hand have these kind of exploitative kind of subject matters and things to them,
Okay.
but they at the same time are incredibly well crafted, well
Wow.
made, very artfully produced and edited, and the imagery and the everything about them were really sort of a notch above the kind of things that you would expect to see in American sort of
Yeah.
drive-ins and things
Yeah.
at the period.
Extraordinary.
So this Animerama set of films were produced by a company called Mushi Production,
Yeah.
and they were meant to be animated films, but they were aimed at an adult audience, and they had more kind of those sort of like kind of more adult themed storylines. And so, more to do. They were kind of sexy and sexed up and things like that.
Okay.
There were three films that were made. One of them's called 1001 Nights.
Yep.
The other one is called Cleopatra.
Yeah.
And these films were directed by someone called Isamu Tezuka.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm just holding up a Blu-ray that's available from Third Window Films, who release a lot of Japanese stuff over here.
Right.
And they've put a double feature disc together of those first two films. They're very much in a different visual style
Okay.
than Belladonna of Sadness is. They're done more in a cartoony style that you would associate with Japanese animation of the period. But Belladonna of Sadness kind of breaks away from that. It was directed by a different director, and it has a much more, as I described, this kind of psychedelic feel to it, and just a really amazing imagery. Without going too much into spoilers, the story is basically about a young couple, newlywed. One of them's a farmer, but when they get married, they have to go to the local. I guess was he a king or a
Lord.
mayor, the city or the lord. So he They go to there to, I guess, what they give tribute to him, which is, I guess, part of the tradition when they get married. But then they very cruelly, basically, shuffle the husband out the door, gang rape the woman, and then turf her out the door, and then, which of course, obviously, has very profound impact on the couple. And then there's another series of cruel sort of things that are done by the local sort of government there to the people, and not just them, but they're just really nasty people who are overtaxing them and being really horrible. So this woman gets visited in her grief and in her despair at all these horrible things that are happening. She gets visited by a little, like at first he presents himself as a little cute sort of like sprite who comes to her at night and says, yeah, I want to console you and make you feel better. But eventually it turns out that this is like as some kind of an evil spirit or some sort of satanic being who basically convinces her to give her soul over to him in exchange for power, so that she can then exact revenge and become more powerful in the community. And so that's basically the premise of the story.
It's an amazing looking film with all these. I mean, there is the sort of the panning across the images or pictures, really beautifully illustrated pictures, and the music, the sort of psychedelic jazz, is terrific, and some of it's the music's quite sort of French in style, I would say, and I think it's all set in France as well, and.
I mean, they don't really make that clear, but I think it is kind of based on more of a European sort of story,
medieval European,
sort of European lore, which is why I wasn't quite sure what to call. Like, was he a king or a lord or whatever? That
it's actually based on a book by a French writer called Jules Michelet, and his book is La Sorcière, and which actually is on the sort of the title card of the film, I think. And but that was a sort of, I think it was a sort of meant to be a non-fiction look at sort of witches and witchcraft and Satanism in history, certainly French history. And it was actually, interestingly, turned into a film by a French director, Alain Robbe-Grillet. His film Glissement Progressif du Plaisir, which is another sort of quite a erotic film, I guess, an art film, which stars the great Isabelle Huppert, and also Michael Lonsdale, who's a well-known French actor, and Alain Robbe-Grillet, or Grillet, whatever his name is, himself, which was made, funnily enough, at the sort of pretty much the same time, 1974, sort of early 70s. And but yeah, to me anyway, the story is not really the point here. It's a sort of I have to say couldn't really follow the story.
Okay.
I got a bit lost. But it didn't really matter. As far as I was concerned, I wasn't after the story. It was just this amazing sort of dream that which I was sort of being carried away in, and I enjoyed it, and I didn't feel like, oh, I need to know what's going on here at all. I just was enjoying it for its sort of extraordinary, illustration and sort of art, basically.
It is an extraordinary sort of audio, visual, visceral experience in every sense of the word. It just sort of like comes at you just extraordinarily with all these images and sounds and things, and it just completely blows you away.
Yeah.
And you're right, the story is almost incidental. I mean, there is a story there, just to be clear for the audience, there is a story there about this woman as she succumbs to this devilish character. Like I
Yeah.
said, it's kind of a Faustian story about her rise and fall, that she sells her soul to the devil basically for power and
Yeah.
then rises up, but then eventually that all comes crashing down again. And
Yeah.
that's kind of the plot. But
Yeah.
what you get along the way is just this constant bombardment of extraordinary visuals.
Mm. And yeah, I wasn't really sure what that character was. He was was he a guardian angel, a spirit? Sort of, and then at one stage he says to her, "I am you," and sort of,
Yeah.
you know, what did that mean? That's quite sort of philosophical, I guess.
Yes, and he's a seducer because he seduces her both physically and emotionally. He uses the tricks to try and entice her to give more and more of her soul over to him.
Yes,
And I should say that, like, because as I mentioned, there's quite a nasty rape scene at the beginning, but it's not
that is
done
true.
in the sense that that you would see nothing is presented literally. It's all
No,
done sort of metaphorically,
yeah,
and these extraordinary imagery and things that they use to suggest things rather than showing them sort of overtly.
yeah,
So that, which is what makes it quite interesting as well, because it's so incredibly expressive in terms of the, expressing the emotions and the feelings and the way things
mm,
are happening through these extraordinary pictures.
yeah,
And it isn't all still images. There is lots of movement and animation in it and things like that.
yeah,
But it's done in this style where sometimes there'll be these static images, but they're incredibly dense with like incredible detail and
yeah,
really quite extraordinary. And then the camera kind of moves in through the characters and the different spaces to convey the story.
mm.
So it's really just amazing.
Yeah. It is, and it's got some really beautiful bits with sort of spring. There's one sort of spring scene with all the flowers and the sort of
Mm.
plants sort of blooming and everything, and then that moves into this rather sort of malign, melting sort of scene, which is the Black Death, the coming of the Black Death.
Yeah, that bit is just amazing. That almost on its own is worth the price of admission, really, to see that
Mm.
extraordinary bit.
Yeah,
And also the bit that's quite amazing is when she fully succumbs to this devil, this demon, whatever he is, and then you just get this incredible sort of early 70s psychedelic sort of wild psych out, don't you, with all these
yeah,
images, and it even has modern day images, even though it's an historical piece. There's images of sort of contemporary society and
yeah,
all sorts of familiar iconography and things that just kind of bombard you in all directions with all
yeah,
this incredible music and stuff playing.
yeah.
And it is just you just sit there totally enraptured by this thing. It's extraordinary.
It is. Yeah, I think that's the film. With they were influenced by various artists like Klimt and Redon and Musha,
Mm.
Sheila, and a chap called Felicien Rops. I haven't heard of him
Mm.
before, but
And there's even a little bit of kind of yellow submarine type
there was
style in there
there
at one
was yeah,
point as well. Just like there's a little segment that kind of goes into that same sort of style as well.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, it has a lot in common visually, I think, with that film that we talked about on our Strange Animations episode, Fantastic Planet. And they came
yes,
out roughly around, actually, I think the same year, 1973, if I'm not
okay, yeah,
mistaken. And so they both literally came out at the same time and have
mm,
that very much. I mean, they're not in any way similar, only in the sense that they do have a really sort of trippy, kind of hallucinatory sort of visual style to them,
yeah.
so that they're quite complementary to each other in that sense, I think.
I felt they also, because we talked about the political element in the French film. And this one talks about witches as sort of it's useful for the sort of the Lord and his lot. It's useful as sort of political um, device for getting for getting rid of annoying people they didn't like.
Yeah.
And also maybe as just an explanation for the inexplicable in their world, in their sort of medieval mindset, and which was
quite
interesting.
similar to the Devils, really, as well, in terms
Yeah.
of that, like the use of these things to manipulate sort of political situations.
Exactly.
It's quite interesting too. At the end of the film, the film sort of asserts itself as a kind of as a women's liberation sort of thing, because they had, there's a little thing tacked on the ending, which apparently wasn't in the initial release of the film in 1973, but there's a little
Right.
bit at the end that conjures up the French Revolution.
Yes.
And apparently that bit wasn't on the original release, but they added it on a subsequent reissue.
Okay.
And then I guess Cinelicious, when they did their restoration, they decided to include, to retain that ending, even though it wasn't on the very first version of the film.
Right.
But that's quite an interesting that it ties that in to kind of say that later on, the women were at the forefront of the French Revolution.
Yes.
So
one thing I would say is that according to Charles Solomon of the LA Times, he reviewed it in 2016 and said, today it looks, by today's standards, it looks exploitative and misogynistic. So that is another opinion. I mean, it's definitely exploitative. We agreed. That's the whole point.
Yeah. Well, I think that was a certain, yes, as I described, I think at the time that was something that was being injected into a lot of cinema in Japan at the time. Not exclusively, not entirely, obviously. There were still sort of more mainstream films and things being made.
Yeah.
But there was a strain of that was happening at the time.
Yeah.
And there certainly is. I mean, yeah, you can't doubt that there is but I think here it's not really done in a salacious or exploitative way. It's shown for the horror that it is, and the imagery conjures up very much her experience, both emotionally and physically, and it does it in a really imaginative, creative way to express that and really bring home the real consequences of these actions and things. So I think in that way it's quite extraordinary. So I'm not sure I agree necessarily that this film is misogynist.
I would say it's an opinion. I'm not sure if I agree with it, but anyway, that's what he thought.
Yeah, I mean, and that's interesting. Obviously, if listeners, if you have views or positions on that, we'd love to hear from you. If you,
absolutely,
please by all means
let us know.
Comment. And
it's definitely an extraordinary film, and I thank you for introducing it to me, because I never even heard of it before you told me about it.
Well, yeah, like I say, I only discovered it myself a couple of years ago when the Blu-ray and stuff came out, and but now I just want to shout from the rooftops and let people know that it's out there, and say, go and search this thing out, because it's absolutely amazing, just a jaw-droppingly amazing experience.
Yeah.
If you're in the United States, as I said, I think you have a few options available to you in order to access it. Here in the UK. There is a Blu-ray or 4K Blu-ray edition that is available, and that is, to my knowledge, that's the only way that you can currently see it. And I can't obviously speak for, because I know we have some listeners in Spain and Japan and other parts of the world, and hello to you out there. But I have absolutely no idea about the availability of the film in your neck of the woods. So that's something you would have to go and investigate. But it's definitely worth seeking out, because it's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Forgotten classic.
So, yes, absolutely. Hidden gem, isn't it, Jonathan?
It's a hidden gem.
That's what we're all about here, hidden gems and forgotten classics.
Exactly.
So, right. I think we're going to take, again, a very, very brief break. So, listeners, don't be discouraged and don't be lonely, because we are literally going to be back in mere seconds. and then we'll talk about our second film, the classic Studio Ghibli film, Grave of the Fireflies.
Absolutely.
So stay tuned.
You can follow Film Swap on social media. We're on Twitter and TikTok at Film Swap UK, on Instagram at Film Swap Media, on YouTube at Film Swap_podcast, and at Facebook at Film Swap the podcast.
And we're back.
Hi there.
We're back, and welcome back, listeners. I just want to give a brief shout out for those of you who may have found us on YouTube or access us via YouTube. You may have noticed our little YouTube thumbnail that we use for the episode, and I wanted to give a shout out to a great artist and a great friend of mine called Teniola Soyeju, who very kindly drew the manga versions of us for the cover for our video here. So I just wanted to give her a little shout out and thank her for doing that. And we'll have a link in the show notes to her website, so you should go and check out some of her work, because she does lots of really cool drawings in the kind of anime manga style.
Incredible job.
Yeah, so she's pretty awesome. So go and search her out and check out some of her other stuff, because it's well worth it. So, Jonathan, we're back for film number 2 tonight, and this was your selection tonight. Yeah. So I'm going to hand over to you to give us a little introduction to The Grave of the Fireflies.
The Grave of the Fireflies. Well, this came out in 1988. And it is actually from Studio Ghibli, who I mentioned earlier on, Spirited Away, which won an Oscar in 2001, or perhaps it was 2002, but it came out in 2001, and which is a terrific film. And this is a really, really terrific film as well. I mean, funny enough, I hadn't seen this film before, but I knew this was a film I'd wanted to see for a long, long time, and everybody said it was so good, so good. So I thought, right, well, give me a chance. I actually got to see it now. Really got to see it. And I was not disappointed in the least. It's one of the most moving films I think I've ever seen. Really extraordinary. And unlike most Studio Ghibli films, it's I guess it's more sort of realistic, or whereas a lot of their films are sort of fantasy. Whereas this one is set during the Second World War. And I have to say, do be warned, we are going to sort of give some spoilers during the discussion of this film, partly because the very beginning of so if you want to watch it completely fresh, I'd pause and then watch the film and then come back and listen to the rest of the podcast. And part of the reason that we're going to give spoilers is that really the director gives a spoiler at the very beginning, and the director was Akiyuki Nosaka. And at the very beginning, there's this scene in a railway station in Japan. I think it's actually in the city of Kobe. And there's all these sort of young people. It is actually sort of hunched up, shivering, and essentially there's a sort of employee of the railway station comes in, and he's essentially picking up corpses. And every day these sort of orphans come in and really just die in the station, which is pretty hard hitting straight away. And he picks up this person, and the voiceover says, "I died on the date, I think something like 23rd of September 1945." So shortly after the end of the Second World War. And he picks up this sort of tin, you know exactly what it is, chucks it into the grass outside the station, and out comes this sort of spirit. And then we go back in time and see how the hero, a chap called Seta, how it comes that he died. And he goes back in time on this train with his sister Setsuko, who's 4. He's about 14, sort of 12, 14, 12, 13, 14, something like that. And you get a clue from the very beginning, because one of the things that falls out is this sort of, I guess it's ash in there, and you can see this little tooth in the tin. And you think, that's not looking good. And especially as he's died. So it starts in a sort of, I suppose, a normal Japanese town or city. Actually, there's a city of Kobe, and it's during the American bombing raids. And so there's this little girl and her big brother, and they live with their mum, and their dad is off in the Navy on a battleship that actually existed called the Maya. I looked it up, and the Maya is named after the mountain that towers over Kobe, I think, or near the city at least. But also, I wonder if, because Maya in Buddhism is sort of illusion, or in Hinduism and Buddhism is illusion. I wonder if it was a sort of philosophical point that the battleship, the sort of militaristic aims of the battleship are sort of really illusory. Maybe not. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. But anyway, you can read more about the Japanese destroyer, the Maya, which it has its own Wikipedia page, which has quite a detailed history of the ship. And anyway, so basically these children live in this beautiful house, and then, but this is during the firebomb. It's basically bombing, but in Japan it was took a slightly different form to in Germany. Rather than dropping normal bombs which explode, they dropped these fire bombs, which I didn't. I knew that they did firebombing. I didn't know really much about it, and it turns out they're sort of canisters, and they fall through the air, and this sort of whistling sound. It was almost gentle. It seemed very much at odds with the sort of result of what happens.
Yeah.
Anyway, these canisters land and sort of spew out fire, and before you know it, the town or the city is a sort of an inferno. And the brother and sister run off and manage to survive. And when the next day, basically, there's just a sort of charred wasteland where the city once was, and many people have died, and it's very, very chilling, has to be said. And then the rest of the film is, I suppose that's the first 20 minutes or something, and the rest of the film is them trying to sort of survive. So first of all, they go and stay with their aunt, and then, without giving too much away, they leave their aunt's house and go and live on their own in a little sort of cave, another aircraft shelter, actually, and air shelter, whatever it is. And you learn how they come to die themselves. And it is, it's the funny thing is, it's not all grimness. There's some very beautiful scenes.
Yeah, and hopeful, like you have little moments between all the hardship and the horror of their situation. You have these little beautiful, tender moments of, the relationship between the brother and sister, and these little moments of beauty and joy that they experience while they're, and it's partially a story of resilience as well, that of trying to survive under these horrendous circumstances.
Yeah.
So the film, we should convey that it's not all this horrible doom and gloom sort of thing. That it has moments of great beauty and poignancy throughout it.
Oh yeah, it's an emotional tour de force. It really is. It's an absolutely extraordinary film. And the great American film critic Roger Ebert, he said he considered it to be one of the best, most powerful war films of all. When he saw it, he sort of said, "Wow, this is straight away. This is really extraordinary film. Really, really, really good."
Yeah, the nice thing for me about a film like this. It kind of, much like the Russian film Come and See, and
Yes.
some others that I think are very powerful because they very much show the effects to just normal everyday people of war.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I think
children,
that's,
especially.
yeah, and children especially, and just the absolute horror, as you say, of these bombings, which at first almost appear just these moments of quiet and
Mm.
almost beautiful, but even though you kind of know in the back of your head, yeah, there's nothing beautiful about what's happening here,
Mm.
but but it really shows just how horrible this bombing is. Because sometimes you think, because to me, bombing it's such a horrible idea because there's these people way up in the air pressing buttons, but it's about the consequences of what's happening underneath is
Yeah.
what we should really be thinking about.
Yeah.
I think even just with war in general, because you have we have these guys here down in the city here in London where, they're suited and booted and they're out drinking their sherry and leafing through their investment portfolios and maybe having a wank while they do it. And but the thing is, for them, war is just a game or it's just a business and it's just sort of a way of projecting their power. And
Yeah.
but what they don't see is the actual effects on the ground to the people who are actually having to live in these environments and live in these situations.
Yeah.
And so I think a film like this is vital to really show that.
Yeah.
And I think it does it powerfully and beautifully.
It does. It really does. And I thought of Come and See as well, which is a great Russian sort of war film set in the Second World War, which is seen through the eyes of a sort of 11-year-old boy, I think, and how having sort of children as a protagonist really adds to the sort of emotional power of the film. In both of them, they use the same technique. There's a French film I remember seeing, which is all seen through the eyes of children who are sort of refugee children, which is a terrific film as well. But funnily enough, one of the strange things...
Forbidden Games, is that the one you're thinking
Forbidden
of?
Games, that's the one.
Yeah.
Terrific,
It's a
terrific
wonderful
movie.
film. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would imagine something like Come and See. I would imagine in some future episode we may get around to talking about that in more depth. But it's definitely just an extraordinary experience, and I think an essential viewing for anyone. Along with this one, The Grave of the Fireflies.
Well, one of the strange things that apparently the director said, it is not at all an anti-war anime and contains absolutely no such message, which seems peculiar.
Yeah.
But, he says it was all about people who fell out of the sort of the system, basically, who what is it? Yeah. And I suppose that is true. They do fall out of the system. And at one stage, somebody says, you can't survive outside the system. That's because these two children, they're looking for food, or the boy is looking for food. He talks to a farmer, and the farmer tells him, you gotta, you can't just live in your little house and sort of hope for the best. You've actually got to rely on the sort of state to sort of feed you now at the moment.
Which is an extraordinary kind of completely different interpretation of this film than one that most people come away from it with.
Definitely,
if you know what I mean.
Definitely. I mean, I would say I'm wondering if he's being entirely sort of honest there. He's being a little bit disingenuous. But I mean, who knows?
Well, I mean, there's maybe something. I think sometimes artists, certainly filmmakers, any kind of artist, sometimes they might not even realize their own work, the kind of impact or the kind of way that people are going to interpret it themselves. They might not even realize the own power of what they're doing sometimes, and it's only people like us who sit down and review them and talk about them and analyze them and spend a lot of time thinking about them, that we draw different things out of it than maybe perhaps the artists themselves intended. So I think there is that, whatever their intention was, it can have other intentions with it for other people. Other outcomes. Sorry. But yeah, that's an extraordinary way of looking at it. I mean, there is that they fall out of the system, certainly, but there's also the fact that to a certain extent, they're kind of driven out, because there's the whole kind of plot of they get taken in by what they describe as a distant aunt, who takes them in to look after them after their house is destroyed and their mother dies. So she takes them in, but then she's a little bit sort of ungracious about her looking after them, isn't she? And she kind of makes them feel guilty and sort of constantly is criticizing them and saying that they're not doing things correct. And so the boys kind of in a sense feels obligated to get out of that situation, because he feels right, and rightly or wrongly, like I wouldn't necessarily say that some of the woman's points were incorrect.
No.
Because there is a certain element of, like, this boy is just kind of sitting around, not really, not really doing anything. But at the same time, what you don't see underneath in situations like this is, would be quite traumatic.
He's traumatized,
things
basically.
Like depression and all the things that go with such a. This is really traumatizing. People who are in war zones see a lot of people die, lose family members, loved ones. There's and they see horrible things left, right, and center, and so I think it's a bit difficult to sort of criticize someone who in that situation who's going through something like that.
Well, I mean, one of the things I think that I read that the aunt starts as a sort of a nice person, basically, but she's sort of turned into this rather cruel person by the sort of circumstances, essentially. Basically, the whole country is sort of starving. And so everybody's just obsessed with food. And and that sort of turns everybody slightly mad, and nice people don't act in a way that they would if they had a proper meal.
Well, certainly, survival becomes, very much makes people sort of pull into themselves to protect themselves and think about, meeting their sort of basic needs first. That's kind of what do they call the hierarchy of needs, that people have those sort of basic sort of things that they absolutely essential things that they need to have. And if those are threatened, then yes, it will impact their behavior and the way that they relate to other people around them. And in times of real hardship and struggle like this and really horrible things, people will tend to turn on each other a little bit or become a little less generous.
Exactly.
Which is again one of the horrors of situations like that.
Yeah. And I guess it's the sort of the air raids are a constant presence, especially for the first part of the film, where they're until I guess right at the end when the sort of war suddenly finished, that's pretty intense, and how the young people having to sort of shelter from the bombs. And there is a sort of set, because we know what's going to happen, because the end of the story has been given away at the beginning of the plot. There's a sense of impending doom through the film, isn't there? So what's going to happen? How is it going to happen? And extraordinary stuff. And another thing that came to mind when watching it, as well as Come and See, is Raymond Briggs. Sort of
Yeah, the When the Wind Blows.
When the Wind
Another
Blows.
really
Yeah.
amazing animated film about a nuclear holocaust, basically. But it's brilliant because it's told, very much like this film that we're talking about, in that it's to like an elderly couple, and it just shows exactly their experience. If that situation were to happen, God forbid, that exactly the impact from just an ordinary, elderly couple, and what their experience might be. And I think that is an incredibly powerful film.
Yeah. People who are woefully unprepared, essentially, like these two, a sort of couple.
Well, yeah. There's a little bit in The Grave of the Fireflies too about the idea about the preparedness, kind of almost the absurdity of like when you have the government or local civic authorities trying to say, if this happens, this is what you need to do. And there's that wonderful moment when the boy, he's gone back into the house to fetch something and it's on fire. And then he looks around at the little buckets and the bits of water that they're supposed to use to put these fires out. And you just realize the complete absurdity of that situation.
Yeah.
And he just kind of stops for a minute and just kind of looks and kind of goes, yeah, this is kind of pointless, So he does think for a minute, maybe I should try and do something here. And then he realizes the complete hopelessness of the situation.
Yeah.
So then it just comes down to survival, and let's
gone way beyond that.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. No, it's an extraordinary film, and very different from the rest of the Studio Ghibli films. And in fact, I think many of the Studio Ghibli films are on Netflix, but not this one.
Oh, really? Is that the case? Because I'm sorry, I don't have Netflix anymore. I know the Studio Ghibli films went on there with much ballyhoo when they got put on there, but I wasn't aware that Grave of the Fireflies had been excluded. Which is that's extraordinary.
Well, it's actually part of the marketing. I think if you look at the I think they talk about the various deals for the Studio Ghibli. Most of the above deals exclude Grave of the Fireflies, which unlike most of the other films, which were published by Tokuma Shoten, Grave of the Fireflies was produced and is owned by Shinkosa, which published a short story. So it was just a sort of legal thing. It's not I don't think it's anything to do with, it's just because, just a bizarre legal quirk, essentially.
Well, that's such a shame, because then that essentially means that film can't be easily got. Well, I mean, I would imagine it's available.
You can say it's on Prime. So I watched it on Prime. Okay. You can rent it on Prime. It's £3, I think. And I would say go and watch it. Absolutely incredible. In the UK, it's on Prime.
I watched it on my old. I've had this literally for like about 15, 20 years. This DVD set. I've never upgraded this to Blu-ray, and now that I've watched it again recently, I might consider doing that. But the problem with the Studio Ghibli films, I've never upgraded the DVDs on Blu-ray because for some reason, they're always just really expensive, like more like abnormally expensive compared to other things. And then I think, well, I'll just stick with this one. But this is a nice little set. Like I say, I've had this for years and probably played it about 10 times. But it's such a great film that basically, however you find it, I think you should go out and do that, because it's an amazing film. Again, this and Belladonna of Sadness. Again, like we talked about in Strange Animations, these are animated films, but they're not necessarily. Well, certainly in Belladonna of Sadness' case, they are not kids' films. They're not for children.
Definitely not.
Grave of the Fireflies, I think, probably maybe sort of, maybe not really young children, but maybe sort of, teenagers, maybe 12 and above, probably.
Yeah, maybe
12, 13. That this film would be okay to watch, and probably quite a good film to watch to sort of, to really show, as we said, war. From the angle of what it's really what it's really like, the experience from people who actually are in war zones, and the the horror and the trauma and all the things that go with it.
Yeah, one thing I would say is that there's a good list on the Empire magazine website of the 25 best anime movies, not animated, anime movies, and it finishes at the end. It has a interesting note on the availability of classic anime. It says that though contemporary streaming platforms are doing their best to fill in the gaps, many essential anime movies are hard to get because of their initial limited releases. So, which is a sort of sad but true fact. So, bear that in mind.
Yeah, it is sad. I mean, like we say, we had to postpone talking about Belladonna of Sadness just because, Jonathan, you just couldn't get a hold of a copy in time for us you could watch it in time for us to talk about it. So, it's just extraordinary that film isn't more widely known and widely available. It's a real shame.
Yeah,
because it's worth, and the same with this one too. I mean, I think at least this one, Grave of the Fireflies, is fairly easy to come by, I think, and it's quite a widely acknowledged, great classic film.
Absolutely.
Really beautiful and really powerful, and it just kind of shows you that I mean, I think to tell this story using animation just gives it that extra kind of power, doesn't it? But by telling it in animation, you can really be, in some ways, very expressive and get deeper into the kind of emotions of it that you might not be able to get in a live action film of the same kind of subject matter.
Definitely. One thing I would say is that it comes from a short story written by Isao Takahata, and his sort of experience of the Second World War was quite similar to the story that he wrote, The Grave of the Fireflies. And but since the animation, there have been 2 live-action films made of it.
All right.
Yeah, more recently.
I wasn't aware of that, actually.
Yeah, in the 2010s. Yeah, I think one followed the other one a year or 2 later. Weirdly.
Okay, yeah, that is strange that they would do them so quickly, close together. But
2005 and 2008, actually, or 3 years later. But still, it's a bit close, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Is there anything else you wanted to say about the film?
No, apart from saying go and watch it. That's all.
Okay. And Takahata, he's made one of the other Studio Ghibli films that he did. I would definitely recommend that you search out. Though, is it called Pompoko, the one about the raccoons?
Okay.
Am I getting the right? And that is a really wonderful film.
Pompoko,
yeah, and I would highly recommend it. So I guess you're saying that one's on Netflix.
I think that probably is.
Yeah, that's a wonderful story about sort of humans and nature relating to each other, and it's really beautiful and really that's just a really great movie. So I thought I would give that a little shout out as well. Is there any other anime films that you would want to give a little shout out, and any that you've seen that you think are worth people searching out?
Well, my very limited sort of knowledge of anime, I would still say Spirited Away, that won the Oscar, is a terrific starting point, and especially if you want to watch something that's slightly less hard hitting. This one, that's a great film.
Yeah, and I definitely, if we're talking about Studio Ghibli, I mean, I think My Neighbor Totoro is just absolutely just wonderful, wonderful film as well. Just a real favorite of mine, and probably a lot of other people's as well.
Yeah.
And in terms of other anime films, I mean, you mentioned Akira is quite famous, and Ghost in the Shell are really worth checking out because they're really, really amazing films. Perfect Blue. And there's some others. I would imagine, we might return and maybe do another anime-related episode at some point in the future and talk about a couple of other films.
Yeah.
But these are just the two in particular that we decided to pick for this show. And also, we'd love to hear from you out there, folks. If you want to leave us a comment or drop us a line, you can find us out on the social media bits and pieces, and please, by all means, come find us and let us know about any cool animation, Japanese anime that you would like to recommend, or any comments on the films that we talked about tonight. Please drop us a line and let us know. Just a reminder that we've got our fabulous, funky film factoids out there in YouTube. So go and find us there. They're just little 1 minute, little quirky shorts about various subjects related to the films that we talk about. So I would imagine Jonathan's already got the wheels turning, thinking about a couple of anime themed factoids that we'll have coming out in the next little bit. And we've also got some other surprises and prizes coming up on our YouTube channel. So please subscribe and watch out for some stuff that's coming up.
Yep.
Our next episode will be out in a couple of weeks, and that's going to be called Bad Reputations.
Yes.
And we're going to be talking about films that have bad reputations, for films that are widely considered to be not very good films in the sort of public perception. But we're going to make the case, we're going to make the argument that no, we picked out a couple of films that we're going to talk about that we think deserve a second look and a reevaluation.
Definitely.
So look out for Bad Reputations. That'll be coming out really soon. So if you just follow us or subscribe, depending on how you access our show, and watch out for that one. It'll be coming out in a couple of weeks' time.
Definitely.
So thanks for tuning in, folks. I hope you enjoyed the show. Jonathan, thanks. And we'll
Thank
speak
you, David.
to you again very soon. And goodbye for now.
Goodbye.